Hey guys, what's up? It's Collegio. So Trump and regime change in Venezuela. Unimaginable a year ago, but is this the end of an America First foreign policy, as many of the commentators on MSNBC are saying? Or does this fit squarely into the Donald Trump playbook? More importantly, is it good or bad for the people of Venezuela, or is it just a giveaway to the American oil companies, who are set to steal the Venezuelan oil? I'm going to give an ultra-realist take on the Venezuela regime change policy. I'm going to take a look at whether it's good or bad for people in Venezuela. I'm also going to look at how it impacts American foreign policy and also how it impacts the world's energy reserves. But first, it's really important to look at the history of this because there's a lot of really rich history here, a lot of underappreciated history, and I think a lot of history that's going to shed light on exactly what's going on today. So let's go back to 1811, and that's when Venezuela was the first of the Spanish colonies in the New World to seek independence from Spain. That dream was made a reality in 1821 when its leader, Simón Bolívar, was able to secure independence for Venezuela and 3 other colonies in South and Central America. And this kind of sets up the frame of Venezuela as a country that is fiercely independent. It's been that way all the way to its founding. Just like Americans hate taxes because that's in our founding, Venezuela has a very sharp independence streak that has to be noted when you're looking at the history. Now, if you go into modern history, around 1922, there was a huge oil find there, and that put Venezuela into the world's highest oil producers. By 1940, it was the 3rd biggest oil producer in the world, behind the United States and Russia, and it fed most of its oil exports to the Allies during World War II. It was a founding member of OPEC in 1960, founding the oil cartel with Saudi Arabia, Iran, and some of the other Middle Eastern countries. And by 1976, after oil prices really popped, they actually went in and nationalized the oil industry. So the foreign oil companies that had been helping them explore for oil and refine the oil were suddenly kicked out. Now, in the 1990s, they reversed that policy a little bit and allowed some joint ventures with American and other international oil companies, mainly because there was this huge new oil find in eastern Venezuela called the Orinoco find. And it produces a lot of oil, but a lot of what they call heavy crude, which is really difficult to process and refine. So they needed some expertise, from outside companies to be able to help them pull the oil out of the ground and then refine it. Now, what's really important here is that in 1999, Venezuela elected a socialist leader. You may remember Hugo Chavez. And Chavez came in, was super independence minded. He had, Simón Bolívar was his hero, and he wanted to kind of end Venezuela's dependence on, the United States, Uncle Sam, that type of thing. He was also an avowed socialist, so he started all of this spending on social programs. The problem is that the oil revenue did not cover the social programs, and of course, Venezuela currency devalued. There was all kinds of inflation. By 2007, Chavez went in and renationalized the oil companies, basically made it impossible, with a couple of exceptions, for foreign oil companies to operate there. I think there's one Brazilian company, and then I think Chevron does a little bit of oil processing, the heavy crude refinement there. But they really made it difficult for foreign companies to get involved in their oil industry. Of course, Chavez dies in 2013, and his vice president, Nicolas Maduro, who was just recently flown out of the country by the United States, he becomes president. There was a controversial election in 2013 that put him into power, and then even far more controversial elections that were frankly rigged in 2018 and 2024. Only a handful of countries recognize him as president from those 2 elections because he was putting his opponents in jail. They were clearly rigged elections, okay? Now, what's really important to note here is that the history of socialism and this kind of, vortex of socialism, nationalism, independence-mindedness, and their natural resource of oil, kind of blending those 2 into the Chavez-Maduro policy did not work for this country at all. It was a total disaster, quite honestly. If you go back to 1997 and the 1990s more broadly, this is even when oil prices were low, Venezuela was consistently one of the 3 or 4 wealthiest countries in South America, okay? By 2024, Venezuela is now the 4th poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, behind only Haiti, Honduras, and Guatemala. Their oil production went from 3 million barrels a day in 1997 to 850,000 barrels a day in 2024. So their oil production is cut by 75%. People are poorer. It's terrible. It's basically, they've taken this country that was once prosperous and turned it into a terrible environment. And the people there, quite honestly, have gone through hell. Okay, so that's the backstory of what led to today. The president, Nicolas Maduro, he's basically kind of a narco a narco-authoritarian, right? He's been protecting a lot of the drug production because that's really like one of their only exports other than oil. And Trump said repeatedly, you're producing this cocaine. You need to stop. He wouldn't stop. He had chances to get out. And then on Saturday, Trump goes in with the special forces in 30 to 45 minutes in Caracas. They land there. They go to the presidential palace. They pick him up before he gets into the safe house. And they're taking him to New York, where he's going to stand trial for a bunch of different crimes that he's committed over the last 13 years. So that's the background of what has led up to today. The main question is, does this fit into an America First foreign policy? Now, the issue here is that most people, when they think of Donald Trump, they have a hard time classifying him. And one of the things I've always said about Trump is that he's not a traditional conservative or a traditional liberal. He's kind of his own thing. His ideology is to find the best deal. And in foreign policy, the frameworks of, globalist or isolationist don't work with him either, because he's always looking for what the best deal is in that situation. And if you go back to June and the strike against Iran, that upset a lot of his isolationist base, because they said we shouldn't be getting involved in Iran. But from Trump's point of view, it was a good deal because it was something that captured a lot of value at relatively little cost. They were able to kind of decapitate the Iranian nuclear program for the cost of a handful of very expensive bombs. That was a good deal. Similarly, I think that Trump was presented with this opportunity of getting rid of a foe, of it basically not costing a lot. It was basically, some fuel and a little bit of risk of American service members, but they were able to capture this whole value of getting rid of this foe of America and placing in place a regime that's going to be friendly to the United States. Oh, and by the way, they're going to open up oil production as well. Okay, so that leads to a very, very big question here. All right, number one, is this going to work for the Venezuelan people? All right, I'm actually, and I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna here because I'm generally a very skeptical person, I'm actually very hopeful that this is going to be a breakthrough moment for them. They had elections in 2018 that were stolen from the people, and again in 2024 that were stolen from the people. These policies by Chavez Maduro have been objective failures, and they've impoverished this once prosperous country. And I'm hoping that by bringing back the rule of law eventually with a new government, and by opening up trade with the United States, by kind of like amping up their oil industry, this way they go from 850,000 barrels a day to 3 million again, that they'll be able to create a lot more wealth for the country, and it'll end up being a far better place for Venezuelans to live than it is today. That's my hope. The challenge, of course, is that these things always are harder than they seem. All right, today it seems like it's going to be relatively easy. Trump's talking about we're going to have some troops on the ground, and we're going to basically assist in this regime change until we get everything done. It sounds easy. I don't think that this is going to be an occupation like Afghanistan or Iraq, where you're dealing with, terrorists that are, doing suicide bombings. You have to go door to door to hunt them down with the Marines in Caracas. I don't think that that's going to happen. So I think that this is a very different type of operation than Iraq or Afghanistan. However, it still is likely to be far harder than people are anticipating, and I think that that's an important thing. But Trump's policy, as I see it, is neither interventionist or isolationist. It depends on the value that you capture relative to the cost. And here, this is a high value capture at a low cost. Starting a land war in Asia or getting involved in Ukraine is something that has a limited benefit and a lot of costs, all right? And those are the types of things that he's going to appear more isolationist on, all right? So if you're thinking about Trump, think about him as being an opportunist realist, all right? Because that's what he's looking for. He's very, very, on the lookout for opportunities where he can use American military force to capture value. I suspect there have been a lot of meetings in the White House over his 2 administrations where he's asked his advisors, why is it that we're spending $800 billion on the U.S. military? What are we getting for it? And the response will be, well, we're getting peace and we're maintaining peace in Europe and East Asia. I'm saying, no. What is the real tangible value that we're getting for it? And right now, here, with this action, he can point to something that he was able to do with the military. That, I think, is the way that you have to look through Trump's eyes to determine whether or not it's America first or not. That's not really what it is. It's really, is there an opportunity relative to the cost? So bottom line, I don't think anybody should be surprised by this action, okay? I think it fits squarely into Donald Trump's ideology, insofar as he has one, which is always to get the best deal. There's one big question is this just a big giveaway to the oil companies? That's a fair question because, the oil companies had assets and fields that were seized in the nationalization in 1976, as well as Hugo Chavez's renationalization in 2007. Trump says that they're going to get back those oil fields and they're going to turn those oil fields around and start, producing all kinds of energy, and that they're going to earn profits from it along with the Venezuelan people. All right. A lot of people are going to look at that and they're going to say, well, this is just a cover for the evil American oil companies to go in and steal Venezuelan oil. Well, maybe, and I think the reality is complex, and this situation is a little bit complex because if you look at the oil industry today, it's not what it was 15 years ago or even 20 or 10 years ago, all right? The natural gas and oil fracking revolution of the early 2010s changed everything, okay? Bringing new oil to market doesn't fundamentally change this new supply of oil that exists once oil gets expensive. Right now, today, if oil hits $80 or $90 a barrel, all of these oil fields that operate off of shale in West Texas and North Dakota turn on and are able to supply oil to the market relatively quickly. This did not exist even in 2008, and oil was able to get up to $147 a barrel. Now, Venezuelan oil is much cheaper to produce than shale in West Texas, all right? So if they're able to bring another 2 million barrels a day of oil onto the market, is that really helping the American oil industry? What's that going to do to the people in West Texas or North Dakota? Now, frankly, it might be super profitable for Chevron, who's already there, or Exxon or Shell or whoever gets back into the game in Venezuela. But there's this big question of how is it actually going to hit America's domestic oil industry? And all I would say there is that this is probably more complex than just the simple argument that this is a giveaway to American oil companies. I think it's a little bit more complex than that. So that's my ultra realist take. Would love to hear what you think. Drop a comment and let me know. Thanks for watching.